Welcome back. We start our mid-morning session with Mr. Eduardo Klein making the presentation on framing the conference. What is this conference about? He will pinpoint some of the key areas this conference will focus on. It's my pleasure to invite my dear colleague Eduardo to make this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Resum. We are going to talk today about this outline, the demographic change and its implications in general in terms of populations and in terms of individuals. And go to the key question of, are older people a burden for future generations, for future societies? Or can they be considered also as a resource? So far, the discussion has been skewed towards considering it as a tsunami of old age, a big bang, big problem coming up for the future. And we'll end up with some thoughts about redesigning societies. The key thing is that we don't have all the answers, but we have to start placing the right questions and elaborate about them. So in this conference, we intend to see what is the general setting that is framing the 21st century, okay? So, we call it the changing nature of Asia's demographics. Kun Panachai, can you start? I want to show you this from 1950. I want to show you this animation. That's better. This animation. On this axis, you have the population over the age of, under the age of 4. That means children. You have screens also on the sides. I don't know if they are projecting. Unfortunately, we don't have that screen connected. But over here, on this axis, we have the population over the age of 60. Can you go back to 1950? Yes? Now, if you see in 1950, most countries in the region had 12, 14, 15, 20% of their populations made out of children under 4. And all of them had below 10% of population over the age of 60. But as the years pass by, you see what happens. Please. The birth rates go up and down, and they follow political, economic fluctuations. But look what happens after 1990. Every country is moving towards aging societies. And we have from Fiji to I don't know, Thailand, Iran, Japan, Singapore, and look at the proportion of Japan. By 2050, Japan is close to well over 40-something% of the population over the age of 60. Yes? So one more, just to show the movement. It has been going up and down in terms of total birth rates between 1950 and 1970 or so. But look what happens, especially after 1990. Now you see birth rates coming up and down, you see on this axis, but then look after 1990. Every country is moving in this direction. Now, what I mean to represent by that, and these bubbles are from a professor called Swedish professor called Hans Rosling, so I'm just taking them without asking for permission from him. Yeah? But the idea is to show the movement that is compressed in time, yes, is in a very short time period. No demographers could predict the way this population was going to change, because population changes in many ways. Population changes in density, and it's changing in density. We're becoming more urban. China, for example, for the first time last year or 2012, is well over 50, just a little over 50% urban, yes? So the trend is urbanization in the region. There is more mobility, the population distribution, but the composition and the structure of population is changing dramatically in a very short period of time. Now, population aging is due to two main factors: reduction in birth rates and longevity of populations. Yeah? Simplifying, those are the two drivers for aging societies. And nobody, I said, nobody could predict the depth and the rapidness of this change. Yes? Now, Asia and Southeast Asia in particular have dramatic changes in population. They are well below population replacement rates. For example, I have some figures. Do you know which is the country in the world that has the lowest, or the place in the world that has the lowest birth rates in the world? Anybody? Singapore, said somebody. When a professor friend of mine asked that, somebody said, the Vatican. No? Yeah, of course. Of course, let's put aside the Vatican, no? But here, in this region, Hong Kong in China has a lower birth rate, lower than 1. To maintain the current population levels, you need 2.1 children per woman in reproductive age. The Republic of Korea is slightly above 1. Singapore, about the same. In fact, all medium and highly developed countries in this region have total birth rates per woman that are below replacement rates. So we have situations like Vietnam has lower birth rate than the UK, or Thailand lowest birth rate than Sweden, or Myanmar lower birth rate than France. So who would ever think that 20 years ago? But that's the reality we're living in. Yeah, that's the situation we're in. A dramatic reduction of birth rates and an increase, equally dramatic increase in longevity. That is what is called aging populations. And that is implying that the median age of population in this region, you see, here you have the median age, yes? In Fiji, it was, in 1950, was 18 years old, and Cambodia in China was one of the oldest at the time. In 1950, was 23 years old. Now, let's see what happens as time moves. Look at the average age in Japan, the mean age in Japan, yes? It goes dramatically. Japan, Singapore, Korea, China, Iran, Malaysia, Bangladesh, Cambodia, Nepal, Fiji, every country, the average age is increasing. Now, by 2050, Singapore, Japan, Republic of Korea, they will have an average age of 50 plus, yes? In 20 years' time in Asia, there will be more older people than younger people. Now, if we continue with the parameters, the organizational, the way we organize our societies, corresponding to the stage where there were large proportion of children and lower proportion of older people, where we had the thinking of the life course where you were born, you were educated to come into the workforce, you were in the workforce for a number of years, and then you had a short retirement period. That is past, that is history. Now life cycles take a combination of education for life, work sometimes for life, in different circumstances, different conceptions of work, different conceptions of communications. So if we don't take grasp of that new situation, then we might be creating conditions that might lead to think that aging is a burden. But let's go a bit more into that. Okay. Now I go on. Okay. If you see, again, this is the last animation I'm going to present. This is the pyramid that we made a composite for all of Asia. And you have every year, the movement every year, every 5 years. So, yeah? So let's go again. We start in 1990. You see the pyramid shape. There will never, ever again in human society, unless something very dramatic happens, like I don't know, a meteor coming to Earth, but there will never come the situation where we have a pyramid of population again. Now we have the reduction of the proportion of children. We have an increase, temporary increase in the working age population. Then we have an increase in the aged population. We have men and women on this side. And we have the increase in the older olds. So people over 80, look at this, no? Before there were hardly any, and people over 80s start growing, especially women. Now, people are now talking about centenarians in the UK. I think by the end of this decade, there will be well over 1 million centenarians, people over 100 years old. 1/3 of people in the UK who are below the age of 16 will live to be 100 years old. Or in Japan, almost maybe one and a half, almost 2 of every Japanese born today is likely to live up to 100 years old. That is a huge transformation, because this has enormous implications in the way the societies are organized. Yes? And I want to go by mentioning something about the changing nature of age. And I was talking with a wonderful lady here. She told me, and I didn't believe her, that she was 81 years old. Yes? She's sitting there in the yellow shirt. But when you think of your parents or your grandparents, how were they when they were 60 years old? You probably, 60, 65, we have an image like this. They were frail, they were old, they were needing support, they had a short lifespan ahead of them. Yes? Maybe that was the situation in 1950, only a short spell of time, 50, 60 years ago. And what is the situation of older people nowadays? You see, older people active, working, having more social life, attending conference at the age of 81 and being active participant. So having bright minds like Professor Keiso or Dr. Vesum still in the full capacity of delivering their messages and transmitting to younger generations the knowledge. So the character of aged population has changed. That's another thing. It's not only the structures, it's not only the proportions, it's the conception, the very conception of old age. Older people now are different. They are more active, they have potentially more capacities in many ways. They come to old age with skills, with experience, with willingness, and with the possibility of contributing to old age. So if a society is designed in such a way that puts aside people because they are 60, 65, 70, and by the mere fact that they are old, they are not considered as contributors to the economy, then that economy is wasting huge possibilities, huge resources, huge investments in education through life. Yes? So that is one thing. So when we talk about aging populations and we fail to consider that, then we are, I was going to say something bad, but we are doing things off the bucket, yes? Sorry, let me go the other direction. Now, you see this situation that throughout the news, throughout the media, we hear constantly there is a demographic time bomb. That's what they say here. Yeah? And this is only from 9th of August, a couple of weeks ago. There is a huge problem coming up for the future generations. The demographic transition, frequently considered a long-term problem, is upon us now and will significantly lower economic growth. That's one prediction. that made by Moody's agency. No? And like this, we find repeatedly more and more news. Why are older people generally considered in societal, in the media, in the general perceptions? Why is this trend to consider it a burden? It will be a drag on economic growth. Of course, I mean, you cannot deny that there are different conditions. There is a cost of pensions. When pensions were designed, it were designed to people work for 30, 35 years or so, 40 years, and then have a 6, 7, 8, 10 years of retirement as an average. But now we have situations in Asia, in our countries, where people work 30 years and are retired 30 years in plenty of capacity. So the burden on the pensions, on pension systems that were designed for a different demographic reality is it will be a weight unless something is changed. The costs of healthcare, again, our systems were designed for infectious diseases. You get sick, you are ill, you go to receive medical attention, you receive medicine, you are cured, you are finished. Chronic illnesses that increase as populations age, of course, require a different setting of the health systems. If the health systems are not adapted to this new condition, of course, might be some difficulties. Or the costs of long-term care. Before, older people were cared in their families, and now families are shrinking. We'll see that. The cost to younger family members who have to abandon work to take care of the older people. Now, look at this. And I'm going on the first the logic on the presentation of what is the situation, and then let's see what this conference is meant to do. Yes? We have a situation in China, for example, and apologies that I take the case of China, but it's the biggest, the most relevant. Yeah? In 2013, for every people over the age of 65, there are 8.2 people in working age. Yes? Now, let's see what happens in 2030. For every person retired, there will be 4.2 persons in working age. And in 2050, for every older person, there are 2.6 persons in working age. Obviously, that this change in proportions has to be matched with some changes in the conception, the way societies are organized. So my point is, can this situation represent a burden? Yes, of course. There will be a burden for future generations but it will be especially burdensome if situation does not change, if there are no adaptations, social adaptations, yes? And social adaptations that lead to rethinking societies, rethink the way these are organized. Again, the life cycle of being born, educated for work, working age, and short retirement, that is not the case anymore. Now, there is a more interaction between leisure, work, retirement, flexible retirement, education for life. Many of us here are 50 plus, are sometimes assisting to workshops, training, capacity buildings, and all that. That was not thinkable some years ago. But rethinking societies is not a matter of policy. We go to the government and the government gives some policy. It's changing in behavior, changing in ways old age and younger age are lived, yes? And it's also a matter of policy changes, but it is a societal change as a whole. Now, just to mention some things, and I apologize to Philip O'Keefe, who will be presenting more the dilemmas in economy, but if you have a sort of an individual life cycle approach, yeah, a relation between the labor income, this curve over here, and the consumption, yes? You have here the age of people, from 0, 10, 20, 30 until 90, and you have hypothetical income, could be any currency, 5,000, 10,000, 15,000. So when you are child here, you don't have income from labor, but you have consumption. And that is covered by the families, by the parents, by the state, by education systems, by etc. And then when you work, you have your working age, yeah? You have all this income. Usually, you have more income than you consume. That's why you can save, smoothen your consumption, save, pay pensions, contributory pensions. In the cases where there are contributory pensions, you can buy assets that will serve you to cover the consumption in later life when you don't have labor income, no? So the consumption in later life is, the aggregate figure of consumption in later life is what is being considered or called sometimes a future burden. But what can be done about that? For example, in labor, no? First, we have to rethink the statistics, the way these parameters are set. You, from 15 to 64 are working ages. That may be not valid, because a large proportion of people continue to work after the age of 60 or 65, especially in Asia, no? But what happens if you extend a bit the working age? You are reducing this gap, no? So you are facilitating the conditions for working age. And mind you, I'm not saying people have to work until 70. That we have to rethink the ways in which work in old age is conceived. The retirement, now, we cannot be like, societies cannot be like the UN. You are in full working capacity today, and tomorrow you reach 62, 63, and you retire. You are not working anymore. No, societies are more complex. People continue to work. But societies have to create conditions that facilitate that work. In here, we have a large proportion of people over the age of 60 continue to work in farming, informal sectors, whatever. But they don't have sometimes access to social security, they don't have access to credit, they are marginalized in agriculture sometimes from extension work, from provision of seeds, etc. So we have to create an environment that allows older people to flourish in their work. Or people who, like in Japan, is doing, working with the retired population, getting them to continue contributing in flexible ways to their societies, to coaching younger people, no? And then there is a fallacy, or there is an assertion, and I think Philip will deal with that, that if older people continue to work, they are taking jobs from the younger generation. And I think that is something that, okay, deserves to be analyzed and will be mentioned later. Now, for example, in Singapore, again, this is a couple of weeks ago. If you see the news, yeah, it says, get retirees back to work. Given that our seniors are living longer and enjoying better health than a generation ago, the issue is how can we best use these resources? It will take an out-of-box solution to tap this growing pool. And they add, yeah, it would require mindset changes at all levels and across all ages, all age groups. Yes, and this is a couple of weeks ago in the newspaper in Singapore. Another way, of course, how to deal with change structures in population is improving the productivities, investing in human capital. Many countries in Asia are investing heavily, Republic of Korea, for example, heavily in education and improving the capacities of people in working age and even in old age. But an increase in productivity will be accompanied by increases in capacities to save for old age. Another one is, and this will deal a bit further on, is there is a discussion that the costs of health in later life, in the later stages of life, increase the consumption dramatically of older people. No? So this curve tends to go up. And I won't go into much detail. Professor Queso and Philip will probably deal with something like this. But studies are showing that age is not necessarily a driver for increased health costs. The nature of the health costs in the US, for example, they increase dramatically because of the technology, the type of medicine, the way the health system is arranged. But in Japan, that is not happening. But one thing that I want to mention, there is a change in behavior. A change in behavior would mean that the consumption of older people in terms of health will be drastically reduced. The demand of health services on the health services will be reduced. And we also see changes in behavior. Tobacco was the main cause, one of the main causes of chronic illnesses, of lung cancer and death in this region. Hugely costly to the families, costly to the health systems. Now, tobacco has dramatically reduced, but then we are now focusing on another type of change, another type of situation, obesity. This is a new malady. But if we manage with healthcare, we reduce the consumption, we reduce the gap, we reduce the burden. Now, the next few years are the time to act, yes? This aggregate graph shows that if we have, this is the blue line is the proportion of children in the population. The red line is the proportion of older people in population, yes? So we are measuring how much, what is the rate, the child dependency and old people dependency on the working age population. So we see that if we see in aggregate terms, population is reducing in terms of children before the population is aging. And therefore the aggregate curve of total dependency ratio, those in working age against those in non-working age, is reduced in this period between 2000, 2020, 2025. This is the moment to act. This is the moment where we have the most capacity to save, to invest in not necessarily, invest wisely, preparing for the population changes. Now, how to adapt to the health systems to the demographic profiles. So the economy is one thing. The health demands on health is another thing, another area that is frequently named as a burden for the countries. And we have to see the epidemiological transition. If you see only these two, middle income and low income, this figure is from WHO. We see that in 2008 and 2030, the increase in the blue, and here the increase in the blue is the growth of non-communicable diseases, largely related to aging populations. Now I'm going to shorten a bit. Now, what can we do if non-communicable diseases are expanding? There are three things. There are three types of persons in old age. The healthy ones, the ones who have one or two non-communicable diseases, chronic diseases, and the ones who have some level of disability. Now, if you have coherent programs of conveying knowledge, of facilitating self-care, giving the tools to people to take care of themselves, healthy aging practices, then you avoid many of them going to have a non-communicable disease, having hypertension if you don't have healthy lifestyles, getting diabetes type 2, etc. No? So, but if you have knowledge, if you have capacity, if you have the means to understand the importance of healthy aging, you can extend life in health. And if you have non-communicable diseases and you don't know how to take care of them, yes, you will go into the disabled category. If you have hypertension and you don't take care of hypertension, you don't know about it, then you might have a stroke. Or if you have diabetes, you will have a limb amputated, you will become disabled, and you will become, the aggregate figures will become a burden to the health systems. But if you convey knowledge, invest in prevention, invest in managing non-communicable diseases, like in Singapore, there was a very innovative program called SCOPE by led by the Chao Foundation, then you can extend life with managing non-communicable diseases. So that is, for example, one way in which behavior changes can be facilitated by policy actions in the health systems. Now, the same is with care. You know, shrinking family size, there is a huge demand on care. And then you have different stages. Care is another long-term potential burden if this green one, the community-based care, the home care systems are not developed in most countries. Yes? And I just mentioned two examples, and I'll finish. Two examples of how we have to rethink the way we act in every day. In Philippines, and Doña Florita was present there, I met her in Cebu. The typhoon in the Philippines, 6.7% of the older people affected in the affected areas were disabled or were in need of help. But almost 93% of them were in good health, they were in capacity to contribute. A large proportion of them had skills, have willingness, have authority in their communities, legitimacy in their communities, and they have the willingness that older people can help. So these are a resource for any program of recovery. So what is needed is to change the mindset that we have to work only with the vulnerable. We have to work with the resources that are there, and the resources are in many cases largely composed by older people who are the ones who stay in their communities, able and willing. Another example is the associations of older people in Vietnam. You see the in Vietnam, in Cambodia, in Myanmar, in China, in different countries. The possibilities of social organization at community level where older people have livelihoods, have income generating activities, have provide home care to those in need, prepare for disasters. They also promote the healthy activities, healthy aging. That's another way in which society can adapt to these conditions. And my final point is that in this conference, we are not thinking of the next 2-3 years. In this conference, we have to think of the next generations, how societies can be rethought in such a way that older people are a resource. There will be burden that has to be minimized, yes? But there is a resource that has to be maximized, and we need to find ways of balancing the construction of those societies. And one thing is, in the 20th century, right post-industrial revolution societies, there was another type of social arrangement, social contract, yes? And we cannot, for example, child survival at the beginning of the 20th century became the norm. The health system, the education system, they were all geared for this life cycle that I mentioned before, education, work, and short retirement. Now, this century has a different structure of population, has a different mindset, has a different nature of older people. So we have to think of the 21st century not with the tools of the 20th century, but we have to innovate, create, and I think we have been lagging in general a bit behind in that, and a few countries are taking some sort of lead in that respect, Japan, one of them. Now, how do we redesign societies for all ages? It's not a macro plan that it goes and is implemented. Sometimes it's the sum of different changes, but we need to have a perspective, and that's also what we want to discuss. This is what this conference is about. Thank you.